We're just dealing with some technical difficulties. And let me just pull up the presentation slides and then I can be a little bit more present. But let's go around and just do introductions and conflicts of interest disclosures. So let's start with Jeff.
Jeff Baker with Craft 3, business lender, and no direct conflict interests. I'm Dale Van Valkenburg with Brooks Resources on the Core Area Advisory Board. My employer owns property at 181 Franklin Avenue and an ownership interest in property on Hawthorne Avenue, both in the core area. So potential conflicts of interest on both of those.
And I'm the owner of Big Story Bookstore on Greenwood and 3rd. I'm also on the Core Area Advisory Board, District Business Association Board. So conflict of interest, being a business on Greenwood. Potential conflict of interest. Thank you.
Sharon Smith, I'm here on behalf of the school district and no conflicts or potential conflicts.
I'm Cindy King. I'm here on behalf of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and there's no potential conflict of interest that I'm aware of for me.
Hi, Kathy Austin. I'm on the advisory board, and I also sit on the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and I'm a local architect. I don't believe I have any perceived or potential conflict of interest.
And I'm Corey Harlan. I'm the vice chair of the Core Area Advisory Board, and I am the Cities and Towns Program Manager with Central Oregon Land Watch. No conflicts or potential conflicts of interest.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to introduce, we did get Cascadia Partners, a consulting firm, on contract to help us develop the development partnership program itself and kind of help staff draft the actual program language. So I did want to introduce Alex Joyce and Pauline. Pauline, I don't want to butcher your last name, so maybe you just say it and then I'll remember for future context. So if you two want to introduce yourselves as well.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us in this conversation. I would be there in person under normal circumstances, but my son and myself are battling a seemingly endless cold since he went back to preschool. And it's gotten pretty bad over the weekend. So but next time in person. Alex Joyce, Cascadia Partners. I know several of you and have worked on public policy and development related policy in this area for a number of years. And I'm excited to tackle this set of spending priorities and project criteria with you all. Pauline.
I'm Pauline Ruick, also with Cascadia Partners, and I'll be supporting Alex on this project. Looking forward to it.
Great. So Alex and Pauline kind of helped put together some of the discussion questions that we'll go over later today, but they might they might jump in with any kind of follow-up questions based on the discussion today as well. So with that, I just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of updates. I know at the last meeting, you kind of directed staff to kind of do some follow-up work to help you all make better decisions. So I have met with the staff from the Boise Capital City Development Corporation and did kind of learn a little bit more about their program in particular. They've seen a lot of success with their type 2 partnership program. It's the most commonly used partnership program that they use. And that is the one that's essentially pay as you go. So projects can qualify for up to an 80% reimbursement on an annual basis of the TIF that they generate. And so it kind of preserves the risk from the TIF agency because they're never giving away more than what they collect. They've seen a lot of success with that program. The CCDC, the Capital City Development Corporation, does have a lot more revenue than we do. They have multiple urban renewal districts, and they also oversee a parking district that generates about $8 million in revenue just from parking. So they have a lot more money to work with, but they do a couple different partnership programs, and then they do sort of build in any project into their CIP once they're aware that that project is likely moving forward. So I'm happy to answer like a little bit more specific questions about that, but did want you to know that I did touch base with their staff, and it was really helpful and informative, but they are kind of operating on a different playing field and scale than we are. So something to just be aware of. And then I have been looking at kind of middle scale examples for you all to review that I might send as follow-up to the meeting, just to kind of add to the presentation from last week. And then I'm trying to think if there was one more thing that I was going to touch base on. Ben and I are working on a survey for businesses about kind of what types of tenant improvements are they most interested in, and should be sending that out to the Bend Central District Business Association and get input before our next meeting. So that's also in the works. So yeah, and then we can turn it over to public comment. I don't actually see anyone that's here from the public to give public comment. And I don't see any online participants. So unless Elizabeth, our city attorney, wants to make public comment, I'm going to go ahead, and I think we can kind of just move straight into discussion questions. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, unless you have an update on the video. Okay, we're just making do. As long as Alex and Pauline can hear us, right?
We can.
Okay, and you can kind of see, you can see that Cindy's dressed up as a stewardess, hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, and Alex, can you see the screen?
Sure can.
Okay, perfect. So I think the first question that we had for you all was just, it's kind of, we're going to go through a series of who, what, when, where, why. And I did send out a PDF of some of these questions earlier that I actually printed off as well. Sure. But kind of the first question that we had for you all, and I know that we've kind of talked about this already, so it's a little bit redundant, but really, what are those priority project types that you'd really like to see a development partnership program focus on or prioritize? And I know that we've talked about housing being a key component of that. And I think kind of just asking a little bit more follow-up questions of, is it any housing type? Do we want to have extra prioritization or level of benefit if we see a development coming in to offer middle income, affordable, or even mixed use? And then specifically diving into what are the other types of uses other than housing, if at all, that you would like to see prioritized. So, the BCD in particular has been seen as a makers district historically. Is that a type of use that we wanted to incentivize? Is it food, beverage, restaurant? So if you have a little bit more thoughts on specific priority project types, maybe we can kind of just go around the room, starting with Corey on answering this question, and Pauline is also helping to take notes.
I think all three of these called out are important. So I'd like to hear more of like where other folks are at on this, but I think all three of these should be things that we're looking for in project types. I don't have like a strong opinion on sort of mix at this point, but I know a theme we've talked about is keeping it a little more flexible in these early days, right? And then, as we move through time, maybe we kind of, establish more clear parameters around some of these. But I think all three at this point are ones I'd like to keep on the table and in play.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think that, being on the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, we do have the ability to help deed restricted affordable, but at this point, there's not much help for the middle income. And I see that as a huge need in the community. I'm just not sure how to sort of, if we give them funds, how to ensure it stays in that range. I'm not clear on that, but I'd like to see more information on that. And then as an artist, I'd also like to see us continue to encourage maker spaces. And one of the concerns that I have especially for visual artists, is they don't make much money. And They could possibly benefit from the affordable housing, but they could also give benefit and give an amenity to the community if there was some affordable gallery space or maker spaces. One of the great examples that I'm very familiar with is the Torpedo Factory in Alexandria, Virginia. It's an old torpedo factory from World War II that was taken over by artists. And then the city of Alexandria actually purchased the property and they subsidized the use. And it's a huge tourist draw. It's enormous. It's filled with all kinds of visual arts. And it's a huge amenity. And if anyone wants to look it up, it's called the Torpedo Factory in Alexandria, Virginia, is a great example. So I think if we can stay flexible and, you know, jump on opportunities as they happen, but consider makers as we move forward in this discussion. I think that would be an important thing to do.
Like keeping that kind of at the top.
You know, just being aware, because we tend to think mostly about affordable housing or mixed use. And I just don't think the makers gets the attention that it really deserves. And particularly in keeping sort of avoiding gentrification to a degree, that there are people doing makers work in there right now. We'd like to keep them there and not price them out. So just thinking in terms of what can we do for those artists and makers as we move forward. So it makes it an interesting space to visit.
It does.
You know, it's kind of what's happened in the past in many cities is that these artists draw people in and then it gets gentrified and they get forced out. And I just don't want to see that cycle repeated. The city of Los Angeles has actually made a concerted effort to keep their arts district affordable to artists and galleries. And they play an active role in that district as well. So there's examples of what could be done. And I just want to see us to be mindful as we move forward to not lose that specialness of the district. So.
Mhm. Well, I would agree with a lot of what you have shared. Just one thought, with this being in the part of town that it is, I think the climate friendly and equitable communities will play a role too, and that'll probably help the middle income housing efforts, just based on my level of research. But I think all of these topics, keeping them as priorities and then building on them with additional information as we go, I think is really a smart way to go forward.
Yeah, I agree that the middle income, affordable and mixed use housing types should have some priority emphasis. In terms of other businesses, I think we need to support businesses as well as housing. And I think encouraging the makerspace, because that's sort of one of the guiding principles in this area is important. But I also think other businesses will kind of activate the space. Food and beverage is a good example. And, these days with food carts, you can activate a space for a lot less capital investment. I do think it's important, though, that we don't ignore that, the larger business that's going to come in and really do something larger, because that will then catalyze other business development. So being mindful of supporting all of those things, also having some room if we get a larger developer who wants to come in and do a large building. Maybe it has, maybe it's partly mixed use, maybe it's got some food beverage, so that there is enough room to get that larger tax generating business in the core.
I guess like a follow-up question, like what is a specific larger business that you think of?
Yeah, me too.
I don't know that I have a particular business in mind.
Mhm.
Just that we need to have some flexibility so that if, maybe it's somebody that wants to create an event space, or maybe it's somebody that wants to do a large food court pod, or I think
Mhm.
not necessarily focusing on the type of business, but getting a larger development on the ground.
Mhm.
I don't know how to articulate that other than, maybe they can fit within some of these other categories. But what I don't want to do is focus on, I don't want this to sound wrong, not just the artists, because they're an essential component of the success of this core area. But in order to get that domino effect, if there's a larger business that wants to come in, that's going to generate a bunch of TIF money, and maybe the pay-as-you-go is the way to attract that one.
Mhm.
Maybe that's more of a medium.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm
Because it's
thinking
still a
large
small business,
compared
one
to-
person. bringing
Large
in.
compared to like just a small maker space. So maybe
Mhm.
My thoughts are that housing and retail restaurant mix. I think there should be my biggest interest is having people come to the area and stay and shop and walk and eat and stay, to visit more than one business, which I think is what is happening now. And so having a mix of places to visit, along with people living there to increase that repetitive customer base. I think that customer facing businesses are important in this area as opposed to just administrative office or a construction business, something like that, like to encourage more people. And then just around, hold on, that's all I have to say about that. The what part, yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything everybody said. I mean, I think the key is just to cast a wide net to start out here and see what swims in. Because we don't know what that first project's going to be. So I think we need to be adaptable and flexible and opportunistic. And once you can kind of get stuff rolling, I think we can start being a little more selective about, okay, what do we really need now that something is going? Yeah, just listening to the conversation, larger businesses brings a lot of people in. Les Schwab does that, but I don't think that's the type of business we really wanted to see develop down there necessarily. I mean, they had to change the zoning to do it or get exempted from it, but undoubtedly it's generating TIF and it's getting people in the area and it's showing new investment in it. So, a bit of a mixed bag, but I don't think we would have been rolling out incentives to attract Les Schwab to come into the area. Just last regarding the makerspace and the artist space, I went to an Urban Lands Institute conference in San Diego many years ago, and we did a tour of redevelopment sites. It was really fascinating to see what was going on, adaptive reuse and new buildings going up. And this restaurant owner who was operating this space, he had this somebody asked the question, what is where are you, how do you pick these new spots that are, really the cool new hubs and the hip things? And he said, well, hip chases artists, artists chase the cheap rent. And so that's what was driving all these little, here's the new hot pocket. And then all of a sudden it changes and then the artists can't afford to be there anymore. So they find where the cheap rent is. And I think it's a natural process. And I don't know how what you really do unless there's a really concerted effort to create that space. But right now, those kind of uses are going to operate out of the older buildings with cheaper rent and a not terribly desirable area because that's where they can afford to be. That's all I got.
For priority types, I mean, I agree with everybody else, but I mean, if we're saying actual priority, I'm going to go affordable first, just because it trickles down to the other stuff. Like when we talk about food and beverage, I look at it as okay, restaurant, bars, that's going to take staff. And as we're keep talking about, keep people in the area, that's kind of the offset. In Prineville, I do some work in Prineville, and their biggest issue is there's not enough restaurants and not enough bars. So everybody comes to Redmond and everybody goes to Bend. And so, for this space, it's you know, when you look at it, it's like, hey, it's a little mini Prineville. And so keep people in, but also to Elisa's point, bring people there too. So how do you do that? I think the other piece for me, when we talk about other uses, the food and beverage also, to me, also goes to like hum, which is already there. So we're talking, and the makers as well, which is that kind of like value add. You are taking something and manufacturing to something different. So you've got to make space for that as well. And one of the things going back up, and I know I'm bouncing between both, the mixed use, some of the stuff that's happening in Seattle with like South Lake Union and the Amazon projects is really cool when you consider the mixed use in 3 or 4 stories. I looked at a project that was a kombucha, like, you know, just basically a kombucha retail space, but they did it like Crux. Whereas you had the production, it was 4,000 square foot. It's on the 2nd floor and 3 floors of, it's not affordable because it's Amazon, but it's nicer spots. But, you know, they didn't limit the mixed use space to the bottom floor retail. It could go up in the building depending on it made sense and what was driving the community. And I thought that was a really unique idea to get people to stay and work. So that's my 2 cents.
Alex or Pauline, do you have any follow-up questions for the group on any of those?
No, I would say that we took the approach of trying to frame these in a positive, the sort of projects that we want to try and affirm with the policy. But you can imagine that establishing criteria for a project like this, for an investment project like this, is just as important to allow for staff and the group to say no to certain types of projects that don't, you know, rise to or can't be characterized as having some of these attributes. And not all of them are defined by just the what. There's also the who it serves, right? And so you're sort of, some of this conversation is bleeding into the who rather than the what. But I would say we need just enough, in the spirit of flexibility, where we'd like to land is just enough meat on the bones that it can be pointed to and say, this project does this thing, that's why we want to fund it. But also this project didn't do these things. And so it gives a rationale for, you know, being able to say no, since there are going to undoubtedly be more opportunities to spend money than there is money.
Yeah, I think I had
Think
two
about things you
follow-up.
want to try and avoid too, I guess is the way I would. So if there are things that you absolutely think are not priority projects, we didn't put that on here, but that would be helpful to know.
Yeah, that was one of my follow-ups as well. Are there specific types of projects that you wouldn't want to see TIF assistance go towards?
Gas stations, C-stores.
Automotive,
They're
dependent or
just
oriented?
surrounding, right? They're more on third. But like if we look at the core area, like I don't think we need that. And yeah, and then just the environmental impact on that stuff and just the generation of income. It's not gonna do that much for that much space.
So trying to avoid auto-oriented and auto-dependent.
Which are, yeah, the code already.
Well, not for the entire core area. For the Bend Central District,
Mhm.
yes. But not the entire core area limits automotive or auto-dependent uses.
And that's why Les Schwab had to redraw the boundary of the central district.
Mhm. Any other types of uses that you definitely wouldn't want to see TIF assistance go towards?
The point of customer facing is important. And so maybe a standalone office, you know, that really doesn't interact with the district.
Mhm.
I'm not going to be real excited about that.
Mhm.
Yeah, we've looked at a 181 Franklin early on. We looked at an office building because we had somebody who wanted a big office. It's like, this feels like suburban, you know, this isn't what should be here.
So
Or a mixed use, like you had some retail and then an office and some housing. I mean, that I think would be acceptable. You have the opportunity for live work.
mhm.
I think if it was something that was like a super luxury, high end kind of, I might want to talk that one through about how we might feel about something like that. It could be like a great TIF generator, but if we sort of said, hey, middle income, affordable, mixed use, or these things that we want a project to have, right? And they've got mixed use, let's say, but then the rest of their offerings are going to be much more on that very high end sort of luxury penthouse model. I think that might kind of give pause for what we're trying to bring to that area. However, I know we have talked a lot about like wanting to just sort of cast that wide net. So I think I might struggle a little if something came in and, checked one of these boxes, but was really offering something to the market that a lot of people just really, that are really struggling, like couldn't afford, right? And it isn't even in that middle income bracket. So I'm curious what the group would think about something come in the doors like that. And I know like this area kind of being what it is, maybe that's not even a real possibility at this point, because, you'd have to, like, I think we've heard from Dale and others, you have to, your rent is contingent on, how desirable that area is. So this may not be even an issue that we need to deal with early out, but better.
Well,
maybe to ask
the core pine area is also in the core area. So
I think you'd be much more likely to see that at Core Pine than you are in the central district.
But like, what type of projects? I would like, me, I go like spas or jewelry stores with, right? Like, what are you thinking as far as like high end? What does high end mean?
Oh, I get.
Just housing.
Well, or some of those retail, that you just threw out there, but I mean, yeah, like more of like on the housing.
Okay, I'm with you on the housing, right? Like, let's not make it crazy.
How would we feel about a hotel? Some short-term rentals. I mean, having a hotel there might bring more people in.
Hotel, yes. Airbnb, VRBO, no.
And there's already a number of hotels in the area.
Smaller boutique hotel.
Yeah, but maybe somebody wanted to do a smaller boutique hotel and have, artist space or, I could see.
or a motel renovation. There's a lot of existing.
Ideal.
Well,
We'll think of like the Plaza Motel, which I don't know if everybody remembers, it was on. What's that? Street? Yeah, and it was an old motel, 70s motel. They converted it into luxury hotel rooms. But it's still small. Is that something that we would want?
I would think it's more in terms of who actually needs help to create a project. If a project makes sense financially without our help, then we shouldn't be spending our spare dollars to help. So I guess I think it's down the road, but I think, as Dale says, we kind of have to cast a wide net now and then just sort of see what comes to the fore. One thing that I wouldn't want to see, but I think it's highly unlikely, is a tech hub that has everything inside its own building, so its employees never have to leave. That's kind of what Google did. And, pardon? And well, you want people who are there that go out and visit all the other things that are in the area. So you wouldn't want something that's so inward facing that they provide their food and their workout gym and their, everything. Makes me so, you want something that contributes, that brings people in and invites people in and isn't walled off and its own little fiefdom, I guess. But I think that's highly unlikely that we're going to see that, but I just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, I think keep that wide net open. This kind of reminds me of a conversation I have with my son a lot. He's like, what if we win the lottery? And then he spends all this time. What would he do if he got all that money? And it's like, well, let's just get the money first and then figure it out. Let's get the net. Let's see who shows up. Let's see who applies and then process it. Because we're all, really dialed into what possibilities can happen. And I don't want to cut off any possibilities before.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I think what comes before us, we'll have a good, robust discussion at that time. But we can put out the word that we're encouraging the kinds of projects that enliven the area and contribute to the area. And then we see kind of what comes forward.
In the early days of this, as projects start coming forward, I would like to really empower and trust our staff here. It's like, when you are talking to people and you have somebody with the project, I don't know how, if you can do a quick convene kind of subcommittee or group to like bounce the ideas off, and then is this something that you guys support? Then you could take that on to Borough or whatever you do. But yeah, I don't want to put so many shackles on you that you don't really have the ability to respond. Oh, sorry, you don't get that one, you know, but everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm giving city attorney's office like a look just to see if Elizabeth has anything to add to kind of that framework.
Sure.
And then Alex also has his hand up too, but.
Hi, everyone. Elizabeth Oshel with the City Attorney's Office. Staff can certainly meet with committee members to help, committee members can help staff do their work. I think what you want is to set up enough criteria that somebody can read the criteria and say, do I fit in this box? And then I think, as someone was saying earlier, that you can point to the criteria and say, you met it, and that's why we awarded funds, or you didn't meet it, and that's why we didn't award funds, right? And I think you can have weighted factors and all of that, but I think it certainly can't be ad hoc. Like, we actually just don't like you're painting your bricks, and we don't like painted bricks, so no funding for you, right? Like, it has to be, unless that's your criteria, right? So I understand wanting to cast a wide net, but I think if you cast a wide net, then you're gonna have a lot of eligible projects. And if you want to reduce the number of eligible projects, then you have a smaller net and describe more the criteria of what you're looking to fund. So, and I think if you're going to just have sort of an open application process, right? Just anybody apply. And if you meet the criteria, you'll be funded up to a certain amount. That's one way to set up the program. Or we have, $200,000, the deadline is X, and you're limited in your funding, and you're deciding which projects to award in an RFP cycle. So there's different ways to go about it, and you want to craft your criteria differently because you'll be looking at applications differently in those different models. So if that helps.
Yeah, and I had suggested the RFI model, like similar to what we do on the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, so that there's a definite cycle, and that we can review whoever comes in and see who's the most worthy out of the group, or either spread all the money over everybody, or just pick a few to get them over the finish line. I think what we don't want to do is have a first come, first serve and not know what might be coming down the pipe. That's my personal opinion.
So like finding the balance between being flexible, but having some guided outline so people know what to expect and how to apply. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Yeah, because we don't want to make it too restrictive, because then it restricts development, and I think that's why we're here now.
Yeah, and I actually think that we have less funding capacity available. I think you all think there's no projects in the pipeline. There are a lot of actual projects that I think would be looking for this assistance. And so it does help staff to be able to know how to prioritize one project over another, or to what level you'd like to incentivize, because there is more happening than I think you might be aware of.
That's what I was going to ask you, is what are there projects out there sort of waiting to see what comes out of this? And then you might have a bunch, jump in on it, or.
Yeah, well, and we've had, many pre-applications in the area as well. A couple food cart lots, so there's definitely kind of multiple things going on. And then I'm constantly hearing about more. And then there's several larger scale developers. So I think that your funding availability is going to be less when you actually look at the projects that are out there. And so it is helpful to have a little bit more. I know that you want to stay flexible to opportunities, but it is helpful to have a little bit more clarity on what it is you are actually trying to incentivize or want to fund.
Yeah, that's
Alex
that's
has had his
helpful.
hand up
Yeah,
for a while.
Alex.
No problem. Dale, just building on what you were saying, in addition to, I think it is really helpful to have trust in staff for these things, because this is the one government, kind of layer of government that is intended to move at the speed of private development. And that's a critical kind of part of these kinds of programs functioning healthily. So I think that's a really important point to underscore. But I also think that in addition to the what, a project doesn't have to succeed or fail based on only the what, right? That's why we've laid out a series of these questions. And so there can be considerations about who it benefits. If the problem is particularly sticky, right? Like so that gets down to the one of the other questions around like what are kinds of problems are these funds being directed at and trying to help overcome. And so you don't have to succeed 100% on all these. I think in the spirit of flexibility, we've tried to lay out a number of ways, perspectives to look at the sort of who benefits and what are you trying to overcome and what are you trying to achieve. And so they can all be different lenses that the program can be viewed through too, sort of independently and then holistically. So I just wanted to make that point, is that you don't have to, score 100 out of 100 on every single one to pass go.
Go ahead.
Just looking towards the future, I'm confused of how the board is going to be used. I'm visualizing either we're giving you direction, you put together a checklist and go from there. But then I'm also visualizing us sitting around here reading applications. So like, what does it look like for our participation? What do you need from us? Do you need specifics or?
So how I'm envisioning it, I think it's still kind of subject where we still need to have a lot of internal discussions. I think we need to work with Cascadia partners too, kind of from this feedback that we get. But how I'm currently envisioning it is the business development partnership program would have an annual program amount of funds that we would do sort of a call for projects and receive applications and have scoring criteria. So we would bring something to Borough that says, CAAB would like to use set up an annual program that's funded this amount, at least in the first year. And these are the scoring criteria that we'd like to use to review applications and get the authority from Borough for either CAAB to make a recommendation to Borough on how to prioritize those funds among the applications that we get. Or Borough could also give CAAB the authority to directly fund those things. It's a little bit, the conflicts of interest issue isn't quite as intense when you're just making a recommendation to Borough. So it's probably how we'd set it up. But there are kind of different ways that we can do that. And then for the private development partnership program, that would likely be, here are the requirements and here's the level of investment that we're willing to offer if you meet these requirements. And that would probably be more staff administered, but we would probably still come to CAAB with updates on those developments, is how I'm envisioning it. But again, subject to more internal discussions.
The second category, explain that a little bit more.
That would be more for larger developments, not necessarily just like business improvements or like facade improvement grants or things like that. It would be
Just the pay as you go.
This would be more the pay as you go model.
So if you are a business and you anticipate you're going to build something that's going to generate X, then you can get a subsidy up to some certain amount if you match it or something like that.
Mm-hmm. It looks like Alex has his hand up too, but Dale, if you want to go ahead.
I was just going to ask, if you mentioned these projects coming in, you probably understand the sensitivity of talking to people about projects that aren't going yet, but when someone's gone for a pre-app, that's all public information. Is it possible you could send us out maybe a monthly or weekly sort of a digest? Here's what came in for pre-apps that we can click the links and see them. I think it'd just be really interesting for us.
Yeah, I have been trying to do that in the background. But yes, now that you've asked for it, I have a little bit more.
We need the names, just like the types of businesses or the type.
We can definitely do like, here's the address, here's the project. We can send you the link to the application materials once we've had a pre-app. That's something I've been wanting to do. We do have the core area development tracker that I've sent out before in agendas that does track all of the building permits and like any planning application, including pre-apps. That is all address derived. So that's something that's available to you that you can explore at any time. But maybe that's something that we build into our agendas and even just your agenda materials as I send out, hey, here's a new proposed development or, something that came in. So you just stay involved or are aware of those. Alex, you had your hand up.
Sorry, it was just up the whole time.
Okay. So let's move into the who question. So who are the priority beneficiaries that you'd want to see benefit from a development partnership program? So thinking about specific end users, is it, do we want to put an emphasis on women or minority-owned businesses, nonprofits, or kind of thinking more about the, pay-as-you-go model, developer, builder, owner, tenant, who would want to benefit. So again, maybe we'll start it with Jeff this time and then work our way around.
This is kind of my wheelhouse too, so it's good. So I think there's a couple of different questions or like thoughts I'd start with. Priority beneficiaries, I think this is like maybe in the weighting of the application type of thing, like that would be the priority, not necessarily attraction, but like the weighting of like how we're going to fund it. So women owned, minority, I'd throw veteran in there as well, just as traditionally in my business under lend to populations, right? Like, so let's get as much as possible in my mind. And also traditionally those groups, because they have less access to capital, we're going to attract the others who don't need, right? I'm just going to say it, the white guys that have a lot of money from California, right? They're already going to come. Nonprofits, I struggle with because again, that's a space that I work in. I can't remember whose point, Kathy, your point, nonprofits in general are the folks that come in and they go and work and then they leave. There's not a lot of interaction. There's not a lot of retail space, like for people to come in. Like I can think about a lot of spaces or a lot of profits in town. Like if you put them there, they may not even have a front. Like it's literally office space for them. The second thing about nonprofits, especially in Central Oregon, and this is a broad stroke, funded by benefactors pretty well. So I don't know how specific you'd want to do us for beneficiary for a nonprofit. I'd encourage it. I just don't know too many examples that actually make sense in my head.
So maybe more of like a customer facing nonprofit. Like there's like somebody looking at building like a children's museum as a nonprofit.
Yeah, right. Like there's a variety of 501c3s. Yes, but like traditional nonprofits, like I'll say, like environmental centers, the Shoots Land Trusts, High Desert Food and Farm, like those are more office space type nonprofits than a children's museum.
And I would just say, having worked in nonprofits my whole life, that it's really nice when you are in a place where you can get out and meet people for coffee and you go and meet people for lunch. And so while that is something that, you're in that space working, it is like everybody that is a coworker, right? Everybody who's in that space is out like frequenting and, using their money and, going to the retail places, having those meetings. So I do think that there is a benefit there, even though it is kind of yes, it's office space, but a lot of the nature of the work can be kind of meeting people out and about in the space around you.
I 100% agree. That's why I kind of vacillated on nonprofits. Like I can see both sides, right? Like I'd love to offer perks because they're a nonprofit. But if it's not bringing folks necessarily to that space with retail, it's kind of a push-pull in my mind. As far as specific roles, sure. I don't have too much like discretion on that. Like I'd rather hear what other folks think. But as far as beneficiaries, yeah, I think that the ownership type. Oh, one thing I would say is business owned. We'd have to narrow that down to what ownership actually consists of, because like if you go by an SBA definition of any of those categories, it's 50% or 51% or greater as the ownership. A lot of lenders, or like we said 50-50 because there's a lot of husband wife. Like why would you go 51-49? That's government contracts and all that type of stuff. But I don't think that's necessary. But I'd also open it up and say like, hey, the discussion could also be like, well, if you have 5 owners and 2 of them are women, that's 40%. Like, how does that scoring gets in there too? So one other thing, and I'll throw this out there as I talk about veterans, I'm sorry that it tagged to me. I wouldn't be a huge fan of firearm retail businesses in this space. It just doesn't hit my demographic of the walking spaces and stuff. So along with gas stations, that would be another detractor in my mind. Nothing against them. I just don't see them in this space.
Okay, Alex, it looks like you have a follow-up question.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out by way of reminder, like if there was a nonprofit applicant who was a 9-to-5 office user and that was it and had no customer facing or, public facing component. That's a way that, again, you can sort of think about what we just talked about, the what. So how does the thing that's getting built engage with the district and users of the district, but also the who? And maybe it wins on one set of criteria, but not on another. And so it gives you that ability to kind of nuance a given project. So you don't have to say nonprofits are either in or out. It can be, what are they trying to achieve and what is the project? And does it sort of fit with the other set of criteria that we've established? And so that's just a reminder.
And Alex, I think that's what I was trying to say. Thank you for saying that. Like, I don't want to discourage nonprofits at all. I just don't see it as a incentivized priority dependent on what the nonprofit does. If that makes sense.
It's a priority beneficiary, but not a priority project type.
Sure.
And if I could just,
we're gonna rubber stamp them. So
sorry, Allison, I just wanted to clarify the last section here. So it's important, I think, or at least important to ask the group whether a development project has many different people involved in it, right? It's sort of who builds it may not be who uses it on a day-to-day basis. And you may have, the most hard-nosed, capitalist developer may be building something, but for an end user that meets a lot of different criteria. And so I think it's helpful to just sort of specify if there are any criteria that speak to, any step of that development sequence. Or just leave it open. If you've got a minority owned construction company that's building for a market rate apartment, maybe that's great. So I there's different ways and different types of folks that are engaged in these projects at different points in time. And so I think it's important to that may or may not be important or worth specifying, but it would help us if there was guidance or explicitly not guidance, guidance to not consider that.
And before we move to Dale, I saw that Katie joined a little bit late. So Katie, if you want to answer either this who question, and I don't know if you were here when we still had the what question, but if you want to either answer either of those, feel free, and then we'll come back to the in the room.
Sure. Well, I've just been following the conversation. I think there are a lot of possibilities here, and I agree with everybody who says keep your flexibility as much as possible. I'm not, gotta say, that supportive of giving to nonprofits unless it really makes sense that it is something like childcare or community used space, something that is relevant to the economic foundation of the district. Totally support business owned by women or minorities or just first time business owners, or being open to businesses who are already here and want to expand and don't have the means, regardless of who they are. And I agree that any of the specific roles, developer, builder, owner, tenant, I think you really just have to evaluate that as each opportunity presents itself, because I've seen some pretty unique combinations of a developer and a tenant, for example, that you may want to throw some money at because it just makes a heck of a lot of sense. It's a co-work space, or it's a office building with housing on top, or it's a small business that is essential to the growing biotech industry. You just don't know what's going to come there. And I think with guiding principles, to me, is it adding value to the district itself? Is it something that is owner, developer, tenant, a scenario that is really unique and exciting and needs a hand? And I guess that's where I'm coming from. And so when you think about how to distribute the money, that's the kind of lens I use. Does it make sense? Do they need help doing it? Is it unique? And will it contribute?
Okay, thanks, Katie.
Yep.
Dale, the who.
Yeah, I mean, I think Katie really kind of hit it on the head for me. It's like of the questions, yeah, this is the one that's the most puzzling for me to how we apply it. And I would see it most being applicable to, well, like your example up there of the Lima Market. It's like, okay, well, I don't know if they own the building or if they just lease the space, or, you know, if they would develop a new one, but it's kind of, we don't always know who the end user is going to be. And so I just don't know how to really weight that and how important of a factor it should be. I focus more on the what and the where and the why. And actually, I would add beyond the how, I would add the when is kind of the important one to me that's not on the list. When are you going to build it? I mean, if we can get something, you know, now or in the next couple of years, that's way more valuable to the city's investment in this urban renewal district than something that's built 10, 15 years from now. So yeah, I don't object to this. I just don't quite know how to evaluate it or apply it.
Yeah, when are you going to build it? Just kidding. Sorry. Okay, well, let's move to Elisa then on the who.
So I agree on that, like with the end, who it's actually benefiting, which it could be more, the owner of the building, the tenant. But so like in the property owner case, it would possibly be benefiting the property owner, but then attracting the type of renter who would fill in the business that they're going to be creating. So that could be supporting those tenant improvements that benefit a renter as well. So both would be something, I guess, for us to think about. So for business assistance, what we're talking about, the who, I'd like to see it go to small businesses. So how do we determine what a small business is? Who is that is benefiting? I wonder if we could say it possibly like a small business with a revenue less than dollar amount to have some concrete numbers around it. For the women and minorities, I agree with you about like my husband and I own the business, so I'm 50%, so I can't go for any of those women-owned grants and such. So making it eligible for less than 51%, I would be behind.
Okay, thanks.
I generally agree with the beneficiaries being women and minority and veteran owned, and however you want to describe that. I think that would be helpful. I don't really see how the specific rules translate into a criteria. So that is a little confusing to me. I can see, you get extra points if you are a minority or women-owned veteran business. That makes sense to me. In terms of trying to figure out who's a small business, medium business, maybe one way to do it wouldn't be about the income, which is, I think, maybe getting too deep into somebody's business, but maybe it's a value of what they're going to build. Maybe we have, a construction cost value, and that would tell you what size the business might be.
I guess I was
just
thinking
throw
it
that
more
out.
on like who actually needs the help. So maybe it's actually revenue less capital already invested in your business or something like that, so that it's more of on a needed basis in order to get the project done, as opposed to we're doing the project anyway and a little extra cash would be great. Like,
So some
I'd
kind of a
support
business
the ones that are
analysis.
not going to do it because they don't have.
The two typicals are revenue, top line revenue, right? And then number of employees. That's usually the scale. But then going back to our conversation of like, well, do we want an office space with only 3 employees who never go out in the community, right? Like, so then, okay, well, that business would have small business and 3 employees, doesn't, right? Like, so there's so many crosshairs and crosshatch that we've got to think about.
Yeah, so I agree with Dale. I think the who is maybe not as important as the other questions.
Okay, Cindy.
That's how I was going to start, is the when. That I made a note of that. So I'm I'm on board with Dale, and communities, they're fluid. Things don't stay the same after 5 years or even 2 years, but that word keeps going in my head. The who, I don't know. I don't want to get stuck on that, but I'm trying to say it carefully. I don't want to ignore the who. But things just change over time. So the when is sticking out for me, and a couple of points that Katie brought up, adding value benefits the community. It's going to be this big holistic picture. And that's how I see it.
Mhm.
Let's say childcare ought to be on the what?
Mhm.
We missed childcare on what?
I agree with a lot of what's been said, so I think I'll just mention two things. I agree with Jeff. I don't want to encourage gun sales in this area. Yeah, that might be something I would be a definite no for me. And then also I want to bring up, in the nonprofit realm, I wouldn't really want to support any religious organizations. I just don't think we should be in that position. So I'm just saying the two things I don't want to support, and I agree with most of the other conversations, so.
I tend to think actually the who is important. And I think why I say that is because it goes to past conversations about like who we're hoping to help and serve with this program. Like we want existing tenants, people who are those early adopters, people who are already there now, being able to make those investments and stay there and not be displaced and not have gentrification. We know that's probably going to happen to some degree, but to the best extent we can, trying to kind of, account for that somewhere in this. So I do think like the who, in my mind, is important. And so I think that when we think about like who needs the help, who does this serve, it's like we said, yes, those smaller businesses who are already there, help them do better, help them make those investments and make their existing businesses even better. I think that should be a priority. I think there's this kind of like middle developer, right, that isn't bringing a huge project to market, but that has like a smaller, very kind of, again, very parcelized place here, right? Like that there's something that's really tailored and helpful for people who are playing in that space of doing very small parcelized development on very small spaces. And then we have these really like home run type of big hitter, big dog folks, right, that are in the mix, that a lot of their stuff is like getting over the infrastructure hump, right? And maybe it is for some of these others too, but like because they're doing such a big development, it's triggering these other really massive needs, right, for public infrastructure improvements. And so in my mind, like I do think like we, at least where we've been at previously, is like wanting to try and help kind of serve all of those folks along that spectrum. And so I think that's my thought. And then kind of going to the comment from Katie and from Sharon about like who are the priority beneficiaries. Like in the end, it's the community, right? It's the public, right? Like that's really who benefits. And so I think like adding that childcare piece to that front side, the what, is an important one. And if there are other things like that that really bring that strong community benefit, I think that should definitely be at the top of the heap. So so those are a few of the thoughts that I wanted to share about this particular slide.
Okay. Any follow-up? It looks like Alex is nodding, so he's feeling no follow-up, I don't think. Okay, so the next question, I'm just being mindful of time. We have about 20 minutes left to go through 2 or 3 more questions. So the where. So where are the highest priority locations? Are there specific sub-districts such as the Bend Central District within the core area, certain street frontages or certain zoning districts that you would like to see prioritized higher than projects in other locations within the core area? Show the map. I can pull up another map if that's helpful as well. So maybe we start with Corey and work our way back.
So I think that I would say for highest priority locations, it would probably depend again on sort of the spectrum and who it is we're designing this to serve. I think that there's different needs, very different needs in the core area, in the core Pine area versus in the BCD. I think that the BCD, and anyone who's toured these places, you get it right on a visceral level when you go to these places. It is a giant, expansive brownfield, right, at Core Pine. Like there's a lot of development challenges that for that type of model, but for the BCD, because it's so parcelized, I do think there are some really specific hurdles that people face and really catalyzing the redevelopment we want to see. So I think, if pushed, I'd probably say the BCD probably needs the most help. But again, I think we can sort of tailor this program to these different locations within the core area. And then I think it makes a lot of sense, the streets and frontages question, to really leverage the investments that are happening. So we know we have really great direction from council. Franklin's going, Hawthorne's a priority. Second Street is something that the core area advisory board has really keyed in on, of making investments there. And so I think to the extent that we can, if this help, and again, kind of to that reminder of like, this is just a criteria, right? Maybe you score higher here and lower on some of these others. I think this makes sense to include as a criteria, stacked with others, right? That if you're in one of these places or near one of these other kinds of improvements happening, I think just from an efficiency standpoint, that just makes a ton of sense.
So in the interest of time, I'm just going to say ditto. You summarized that very well.
I agree.
A lot of dittos here. Lisa?
Basically, what I was going to say was the BCD area for centralized revitalization.
Yeah, that would be my top pick too. And partly just because there's already so much time and effort invested in that area with the zoning and everything. So clearly it's, I think, most of our focus.
I got nothing to add. Good with BCD.
Great. Katie, do you have any further input on that?
No, except again, I'm just going to repeat, just being flexible, because things happen and they kind of bloom, and sometimes one small change you will kind of catch with the surrounding block, for example. And I think that there are just opportunities that present themselves sometimes that you may not have thought of. And it may be that little puzzle piece that you thought, oh, dang, if we just had a coffee shop and I don't know, yoga studio right there, then people would come. And because that went in, 2 or 3 other things will. And that may not be a good example, but just looking at it holistically and strategically as it comes in, you already have a good idea, obviously. But even on the micro level, that one shop within that building, within the block, and just being thoughtful with the energy, and it's called messy vitality. Where does it first start to happen? And how do you leverage existing, especially retailers, but any kind of business really, that have invested already and they're already starting to attract more foot traffic, and playing off of that. And it also feeds those folks back that are trying to survive this transition at the same time. And just being open to those types of investments. But there will be some very, very obvious areas, like the street frontages, like tying one district to part of the district to the next part of the district, where you need to invest some infrastructure or some incentivization for stuff to happen. And that's also strategic, but just remembering to be open and to pay attention to what's already happening with existing infrastructure.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Any other comments on the where? Generally BCD, some BCD Main Street, or kind of aligning with investments, but want to stay flexible. Okay. And then the second to last question is why. So why are the funds needed? What are the major problems that we want to overcome with this development partnership program? So these are just some examples. I think kind of one of the big questions that came up and is even part of the how is sort of annual reimbursements or SDC reimbursements. Is there sort of a preference between that? But I'll just kind of open it up and maybe we start with Jeff this time on what are the problems to overcome.
Dr. Corey, she did so good the last time. You did the brutal, like.
I mean, we could start in the middle, Sharon.
Well, I think, I think public improvements and upgrades can be a big hurdle for a lot of.
Excuse me, Allie, we can't hear Sharon.
Oh, Thanks, Gina.
which is very unusual. I think the public improvements and upgrades are always challenging for developers. And sidewalks are always a challenge. So I think those are fine. I'm not sure I really understand reduced building vertical costs. I don't know what that means.
So that's literally to directly invest in the building costs, not the infrastructure or the horizontal, as those are sometimes referred to costs. But for instance, if a financially challenged development entity, for profit or nonprofit, is pitching an idea, but they just have a gap in their sources of funding to actually build the building. It's not uncommon for urban renewal dollars to be a gap funder or a gap lender in some instances. So that's what that's referring to.
Yeah, I guess I think project's going to have a set amount of costs. And I don't know that it really matters if we say, oh, put it into the building or put it into your SDCs or put it into public upgrades, because it's just going to offset a cost somewhere else, right? I think the SDC fee reduction makes sense for housing. And I really like the notion of making sure that we're helping the existing businesses that want to renovate for some of the, sidewalks and the public improvements and things like that. But at the end of the day, any project is just going to need money, and they'll just put it where they need to put it most.
Great. Cindy? We can come back to you, or
I guess just my main question is, the STC fee reduction. Are you talking STCs with the city, like water, sewer? Because parks is their own STCs, as we know. Is that, if I haven't been privy to prior conversations, is that why that is up there for city SDCs and not parks?
yeah, and this would be reimbursing a developer for the SDCs that they pay the city. So essentially the urban renewal agency would pay the city for a buy down of the SDC costs. And that could be inclusive of the park SDC.
That's my only question right now.
And it looked like Katie had her hand up really quickly.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it down. There we go. So it just is occurring to me as we go through all these categories that some sort of, and you probably already had me on this, Allison, some sort of a spreadsheet that has categories of, the size, the type of business, the location, but subcategories under that, like, for example, location could be visibly or technically physically improves the area around it, generates more foot traffic. I'm making this stuff up, but what are the things that are providing value? What is the state of the organization and what it's asking for? And then I guess somewhere between the value it adds, the location, and the logistics and the strategy of where it's going, and the need. Something that has those big blocks of categories where you can list some subcategories that matter and have some way of ticking off some boxes that is equitably applied. It's like a point system, obviously, like a point system, so that you have something to fall back on, because you will have so many choices of where to give the money. And who said that just earlier? Everybody will have money that they need and want to have some investment in an improvement or a rebuild or whatever it happens to be. And just having something really solid that's well thought out, that's not just one category that's based on need, it's also based on the value and the aesthetic and the strategy for the buildings around it, so that you have that to remind yourself of what those options are. and something that you can compare your opportunities with. That's more robust than just an application of need. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Katie.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we've kind of talked a little bit about some type of scorecard or scoring evaluation criteria in some format.
I could just add something really quickly, kind of going off of what Katie said, and Cindy might be able to back me up on this, but in the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, the applicants have to put together a pro forma that we look at, and they identify where there is a gap, or if there is a gap, and there's always a gap. But, something like that, I think you could probably check in with Lynn and Rachel on that process that might be helpful and sort of get you to the end result more quickly if you kind of look at that as an example. I don't really have anything else to add. I think the point is that money is needed, where they plug it in. What might be helpful in this category is, where do we see it always being an issue? And maybe that will help us to target something in the future, but I don't really have anything else to add.
I think my question would be kind of like the private versus public place that these end up in, right? So if we go to a builder, right, and they decide to put the money towards the public improvements and upgrades and the sidewalks, like, no matter what happens with that building, whether it changes owners or over time changes uses, the public will always have the benefit of the sidewalks being improved and the utilities being undergrounded and the street trees being there. And so I wonder if there's sort of a weighting here of, like, again, if the primary beneficiary is the public and the community, like a way to weight that a little more significantly than investments in the building costs or the SDC fee reduction. Again, maybe that's kind of a barrier for actually getting the things built that we really want to see come out of the ground. But that was kind of where my head went. Is there sort of a different weighting you could give for sort of the public benefit, right, versus more of like the private benefit of, like, that goes into the building itself, right? And so that was a question I had for this.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking you could almost do like a ratio of total expected public improvements, like total construction costs of the public improvements compared to the total project value. And those that kind of have like a higher skew right towards like offering more public benefits compared to the private project cost could maybe score higher. I'm looking at Alex too. I'm just making that up on the fly, but one way to potentially evaluate.
Okay. And then I think my other question, and this might actually get to the how, is that what I've heard from a lot of developers and builders is that it's the front end hump, like getting over that initial kind of big hump of infrastructure and building, like that's really where you experience like your biggest hurdles. And so I don't know, I think like the best practice in how is that it's actually a reimbursement, right? So you'd have to get all the way to the end of your project to actually get those costs recouped. I wonder if there's a way that we can explore, try and kind of really like press on providing more like front end support for folks via these programs, because that seems, not for everybody, but certainly for a large number of folks that I've interacted with, like that front end piece can be a really significant barrier to getting the kind of development we want to have happen. So, and that, sorry, that might be a bit in the how, the question that's coming, but yeah, so.
Jeff?
To use Dale's terminology, this is the least one that I'm concerned with. And here's and this is why, quote unquote, everybody needs money. So where it gets allocated in here, I don't necessarily think it matters per se. And I don't want to direct, because using Kathy's talking about the affordable housing, like I can make a pro forma to make it look however you want it to look, to say I need SDC fee reduction, or I need this. Like a good developer, a good business owner, that is really simple to do, to adjust to meet the categories. This one is like I said, the least concerning. We know they need money. They know, to Corey's point, they're going to need front end. That's the biggest obstacle, is getting the project started. So then it just comes down to like the how, like what percentage, like what can it actually go to, rather than going to them and go, tell us what you need, because we know they have a need. And are we directing it somewhere? rather than just total project cost, which is more concerning to me than specific.
I don't know why that keeps happening. Yeah, I will just say there are some intricacies of how we leverage debt for some of these projects. And when we own an asset, we can access different types of debt than there's tax exempt debt and then taxable debt. And so when we do structure some of these programs for improvements within rights of way that the city owns, that is tax exempt debt that we can issue, versus if it's kind of direct costs for vertical development or towards the private, if we're issuing it to the private developer itself for kind of any number of improvements, that's taxable debt. So we just get different interest rates, and it does impact how we leverage our TIF funds. Not something that you all need to be like super familiar with, but it is something that does impact like our modeling for the TIF assistance. So just know that that is staff may make recommendations that do kind of focus these programs on public improvements from a financing perspective. Dale?
Oh, well, that's good to know, because it's like I was with Corey initially, there's, well, public improvements, it feels like, oh, it's a better way to spend this public money, but if it didn't really matter at the end of the day where the money went, as long as we got the project, that 80%, if that's what we're looking at. But if there is a benefit to it, then yeah, we should focus on that pretty clearly. One of the, and I like the idea of, looking at a pro forma to see where the gaps are. And so we can kind of understand what role we can play in that. But, a big impediment that's happening in front of our eyes is interest rates. And that's going to put a lot of projects, throw cold water on them for some period of time, maybe for quite a period of time. I don't know that the city can or wants to be a bank, but is there some ability to use this money for lower interest loans to get these projects going for some interim period of time?
It has been done with urban renewal districts. It takes a lot more staff administration and resources. I think kind of we would prefer to set up programs without doing that initially. If it becomes like a huge need, I think we're willing to look at it, but it's going to be kind of a whole process. So my recommendation would kind of be to structure their programs without doing that first. If we feel like it's a huge need, we can reevaluate it, but know that it will take a lot of staff time and resources to set up something like that.
Seems really complicated and fraught with risk. It may be more than you would want to do, but if that's what's stopping projects from going ahead and from getting investment going in the district, I don't think we should take any tools out of the toolbox at this point. Maybe that stays in the back until it's really needed.
I would say there might be a possibility to do that on a contract basis as opposed to trying to, develop more staff. If there's, a company that does specifically that at a reasonable cost.
I'm looking at Jeff.
Yeah, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's out there doing that and you can contract with them at a reasonable percentage, my guess is interest rates are going to be a huge deal. And, I think that's going to come up over and over again. And if there's a way of solving that, that would be great.
I'll just interject, full disclosure, we do that.
So Jeff works for Craft 3, and Craft 3 has worked with urban renewal agencies, specifically Astoria's Development Commission, to structure those loans.
Yeah. And so, yeah, there's that ability. It's way down the line that ever enter this conversation, because the cost for us to do it, basically, I'll just give you the nutshell. It's really, you would take a program like we run and the city would buy down the rate to make it affordable, is how you do it. So there are mechanisms to be able to do that. No down the road scenario type stuff. It is available, to Dale's point, but
That'd be like this urban renewal agency would pay upfront points on the loan to lower the overall, that kind of thing.
You could do there. So many ways to cut it. There is.
Topic.
Yeah.
I think I really do think it's gonna be a huge impediment. Just timing wise is not kind of a bummer.
I will say this, we did a lot of loans through COVID, like with Prosper Portland and other to small businesses. We're talking loans like 25, 50, even up to $100,000 where they bought down the rate that we had to charge. And we kept them on our portfolio for 2 years. After 2 years, it went back to the organization. So you had a loan loss reserve, you bought down the points basically type of deal. So even that can be complicated, right? Like it can be just on this even ad hoc basis.
Well, and I think we're starting out with not a lot of funds. So as we become more flush, maybe there's an opportunity, but I think we need to focus on what can we do to get money out the door now?
Yeah. So Elisa, I didn't get to you on the previous question, but if you want to address either the why or the how, and I just want to do a time check that we only have 3 minutes left. So maybe it's kind of, I think the how question is a little bit more like staff driven in certain senses of what is actually feasible. But I think it's, if you do have really strong preferences for this, feel free to weigh into this question. But if you want to answer the why or the how, and then.
The how is kind of in my notes as well. So I think the why, like everyone says, there's a funding gap. They need money. That's why they're asking for it. But on the why, there was the discussion point about sidewalks improvements. I don't know if there's just a simple code adjustment on that, because I think our purpose for this area is to move things along sooner rather than later. And so I don't even know if I wouldn't vote for even the sidewalk in lieu of fee or in lieu of a sidewalk fee, because that could also inhibit their project as well. So something like open space and then the greenhouse cabaret, just making that not an impediment for their moving forward with whatever project. And then the how, I think I'd like to see a lot of support for small businesses to possibly fund the whole project. So kind of off of what you were saying about interest rates and those larger projects where people would need capital to begin their project. I think if we could completely fund projects for smaller businesses where they don't even need to, I'm open to that, like how the percentage of the investment where the business would contribute and 20%, something like that, so not a match. But in order to, for the short run, spur excitement and a visual revitalization of the area on the short term, I think using these funds quickly and direct to a visual change, I think.
Anyone else want to add into the how at all?
I would just maybe a little nuance. I think it's important that even for small businesses, they have to have skin in the game. So I would advocate more for a higher percentage to be paid for by the developer, the small business developer, rather than a smaller one. But I think we have to leverage the funds, and we'll go a lot further if we require investment from people getting the money too.
Like a return on investment.
I think there's going to be a lot of other TIF money. We're not talking about the entire, right? Are we? I mean, like there's still those large developers that would they fall under this?
The small business category. Your total funding capacity is all competing with each other, but we would probably try to structure the program slightly separately.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. Maybe there's a different percentage for the small business versus the large business.
Okay, anyone else want to weigh into the how? Alex or Pauline, do you have any other follow-up questions at all?
Not at this time. Good discussion.
Okay, so it is kind of time, but just so you all know, so we meet again, this subcommittee meets again November 14th. And we'll kind of give an update on some of the equity outreach with Latino-owned businesses that we've been doing, and then kind of focus more of the discussion on the business assistance programs in particular. And then we'll kind of take all of the feedback that we get through these subcommittees to work on drafting programs that we'll then bring back to the full CAAB to consider. So there might be like a 2-month delay or something between when we kind of bring everything back for discussion, but that's kind of where we're headed. And then you have at least kind of committed to funding, you know, a conglomeration of these programs with up to 2 million over the next 5 years. So we're using that to model into the core area CIP as well.
Good work.
Lisa.
I just had a visual earlier of if it does come to CAAB or whoever is the decider or final decision, that if it was like Shark Tank style, where each applicant gets 5 minutes or so to pitch their application basically, but and possibly some Q&A instead of a hard sheet.
Also cost for actually putting it on TV too.
Yeah. Just that ability to have a live interaction.
And that's kind of the format we do.
Yeah.
For affordable housing. They do a presentation for 5 minutes and then we have 10 minutes, give or take, for questions. And it's really helpful, as Counselor Campbell can attest.
Yeah, because we do rank ahead of time, but we don't necessarily give out our funds based on those ranks. It has a lot to do with the presentation and the questions being answered and then a discussion among the group. So it's not a cut and dried thing at all.
Yeah, it's very
Job interview, kind of.
Yeah, it is.
When is the AHAC funding cycle this year? What meeting is that?
So we're going to start, I think we have some RFPs out now. And then November, December, and January and February are the busiest months when we're reviewing the applications. They do their presentations. I don't have the outline right in front of me. Kathy's looking at her
No, I
calendar.
don't
but
have it.
I can send that out to core area if anyone's interested in attending those AHAC presentations this year. I think it might be
even if I
helpful for you all to see how that process works.
share the outline of the timelines that are involved. Because we give the applicants plenty of time to get their information together. We don't surprise them and give them 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Get it going. I mean, that happened once. Somebody did a last minute, hey, let's get it in. But it's very structured and it's very helpful for people that want to apply. And then we also now, in the last couple of years, we have a meeting where we educate the public on, okay, if you're going to apply, this is what you need to know. That way they're not just winging it and missing some important details. Because if you've never done it, it's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it's also timed because of the funding that's available at the state and the feds. It has to meet the timing.
Mhm. Okay, well, thank you everyone for your time. Happy Halloween. And we'll talk again soon. Thanks, Katie, for joining.
Cindy wins the meeting.
Yes, definitely win the